Our manager used to brag that contractors were replaceable, that we could be cut loose at a moment's notice. So when my coworker finally left, he gave exactly 10 seconds of notice. What followed left our entire department in chaos, and our smug manager finally learned what it feels like to be disposable. If you've ever had a boss who treated you like you didn't matter, hit that subscribe button. Because this story isn't just about revenge, it's about respect. So grab a coffee, lean in, and let me tell you how one quiet engineer turned a toxic workplace lesson right back on its teacher. The setup. A world of temporary people. The office was a strange kind of battlefield, not loud or violent, but filled with the quiet tension of people who knew they could vanish any day. 10 of us worked side by side in that windowless corner of the engineering wing, the contractor pen, as they liked to call it. 10 names, 10 temporary badges, 10 lives hanging on the thread of at-will employment. We weren't real employees, not in their eyes. We were disposable tools that could be swapped out the moment the budget shifted or someone upstairs changed their mind. I'd been contracting there for about 8 months, long enough to get comfortable, but not long enough to forget that comfort wasn't security. My badge was blue instead of white, my desk was smaller, and while the real employees had company laptops and benefits, we got the leftovers. Still, I liked the work. It was technical, challenging, and the team of contractors around me were some of the sharpest people I'd ever met. Especially Ethan. Ethan was the kind of guy who made you feel like everything was solvable. He could look at a broken schematic and see the solution in seconds. Always calm, always precise, the kind of quiet genius who didn't need to brag. He was also the only one who could make our sponsor, the manager overseeing the contract, break a smile. That manager's name was Paul. Paul was one of those guys who'd risen just high enough to believe his own importance. The kind who wore his ID badge like a medal and loved the sound of his own authority. You could see it in the way he spoke to us, slow, deliberate, as if we should be grateful he was even acknowledging us. The calm before the cut. That morning, the coffee machine in the break room sputtered like it was dying, and the tension in the office felt about the same. At 4 p.m. sharp, Paul called me into a side room. I figured he wanted an update on the system migration project, but instead, I walked in to see 3 of our team members already sitting there, their faces pale, their monitors already locked. Paul gave me this self-satisfied little nod and said, "Hey, I need you to handle the offboarding process for these 3. You can tell them their contract's over as of today." I froze. "You want me to tell them? I'm not management. I'm a contractor too." He waved a hand like that detail didn't matter. "You're their lead. Just make it quick." The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your stomach twist. I looked at those 3 people I'd just had lunch with, and felt my throat tighten. They didn't deserve that. None of us did. But I followed orders. I told them it was their last day. No notice, no warning, just 4 words that could upend their entire lives. "This is your last day." By 4:15, their desks were empty. Their chairs still held the shape of their absence. The sentence that started it all. After the terminations, Ethan and I sat there in stunned silence. You could feel the guilt in the air, heavy, sticky. I finally mustered the courage to walk up to Paul's desk. "Hey," I started, trying to sound diplomatic. "We were just wondering, why didn't we give them any notice? Like, even a day?" Paul turned in his chair with that casual, unbothered smirk that only comes from someone who's never felt real consequences. "That's why we hire contractors," he said brightly. "So we can cut them loose at a moment's notice whenever we want to." He even chuckled after he said it. Like it was a joke. Like people losing their livelihoods was something to laugh about. Ethan and I just stood there. Neither of us said a word. But I'll never forget the way his jaw tightened, the faint twitch in his temple, the quiet inhale he took through his nose. I knew that look. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was calculation. The quiet before the storm. Paul turned back to his monitor, completely unaware that he'd just planted the seed of his own downfall. The days that followed. For the next few days, morale in the contractor pen hit rock bottom. Nobody said much. The laughter, the inside jokes, the Friday takeout lunches, gone. We were all walking on eggshells, wondering who'd be next. But Ethan, he was calm. Too calm. He'd still show up early, work efficiently, crack a polite smile when spoken to. But behind those calm eyes, I could see something turning, like gears clicking into place. Then one night, as we were both leaving late, he stopped me by the elevator. "You free for a beer?" he asked. His tone was light, but there was something else under it, something deliberate. The confession. We sat at a dimly lit bar a few blocks from the office. Ethan ordered a whiskey neat, his tell for when he meant business. He leaned in, speaking just loud enough to be heard over the hum of the bar. "I've been interviewing," he said. "Got an offer yesterday." I blinked. "Already? Damn, that was fast." He shrugged. "Didn't take long. They actually respect engineers there." I grinned, but something in his tone made me pause. "So, when's your last day?" He looked at me, a small smile curling at the corner of his mouth. "Depends on how poetic I'm feeling." I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" He swirled his drink, the amber light catching in the glass. "Remember what Paul said about being able to cut us loose at a moment's notice? Well, I think it's only fair to return the favor." I laughed at first, thought he was joking. But the look in his eyes told me otherwise. He wasn't angry. He wasn't vindictive. He was surgical. He wanted to make a point. One Paul would never forget. Tension builds. Over the next few weeks, things almost felt normal again. Almost. Ethan didn't tell anyone else about the new job, not even our. He worked like nothing was happening, maybe even harder than before. He was in the middle of designing a complex data pipeline, one that only he truly understood. The kind of system that, if left incomplete, could cripple a department's progress for weeks. And Paul, he was completely oblivious, still strutting around the office, still reminding us how flexible we all were. Once, during a team meeting, he even said, "That's the beauty of contractors. No strings attached, just results." I saw Ethan's eyes flick up for half a second. No reaction, no comment, just quiet, efficient work. Like a soldier preparing for a silent strike. The last day, the morning of his departure started like any other. I remember the way the sunlight hit his desk, a rare shaft of light sneaking through the blinds, illuminating his workstation like a stage spotlight. He showed up on time, coffee in hand, expression calm. There was no sign of what was coming. Around 4:45 p.m., Paul did his usual lap around the floor, hands in pockets, pretending to be busy. "All right folks, let's wrap it up soon. Another productive week, yeah." Ethan just nodded, his hands still moving across the keyboard, but I noticed something strange, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Not smug, peaceful. At 4:59, he hit enter on his keyboard one last time. Then he closed his laptop. He unplugged his docking station, rolled up his cables neatly, and stood up. I looked up from my screen. Heading out, he just smiled. "Yeah, I think it's time." He walked over to Paul's desk, steady, unhurried steps. Paul looked up, half distracted. "Hey Ethan, what's up?" Ethan set his laptop, mouse, and docking station neatly on the desk. Then, with that same bright tone Paul had once used to dismiss our coworkers, he said, "Hey, thanks for everything. This is my last day." Paul blinked, confused. "Wait, what, you're leaving?" Ethan nodded cheerfully. "Yep, thanks again." Then he turned, and walked straight out. No notice, no handoff, no explanation, just poetic symmetry. As the door closed behind him, Paul sat frozen, still processing what had just happened. And right at that moment, as if on cue, Ethan's final email hit our inboxes. Subject line: "Last day, thanks everyone." Body: "Just wanted to say it's been great working with you all. Today's my last day, wishing you all the best moving forward." That was it. No details, no next steps, no project notes, just closure. When I looked over at Paul, the color had drained from his face. He stared at Ethan's empty desk, then at his monitor, then back at me. "You knew about this?" he demanded. I just shrugged. "Hey, that's why you hire contractors, right? So they can leave at a moment's notice." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. And for the first time since I'd met him, Paul didn't have a single word to say. Fade out to the quiet hum of the office, the sound of clicking keyboards returning, but slower, heavier. Soundscape. The quiet buzz of an office morning, subdued chatter, muted keystrokes, the faint hum of a printer. But there's an emptiness now, a missing heartbeat. When I walked into the office the next morning, Ethan's chair was still there. Empty. Perfectly aligned. Too perfect. Like a ghost had left it that way. His monitors were dark. The cables he'd neatly wrapped now looked like evidence. Silent proof that he'd meant every move, every second of his departure. And the room felt wrong. Like the air itself knew something had shifted. Paul was already there, pacing between desks like a storm cloud in a tide. His usual confidence was gone. His face was tight, pale, eyes darting between screens. "Where the hell is Ethan's code?" he barked. "Where did he save the final repository?" Nobody answered. Nobody even looked up. I wanted to tell him that the code was probably sitting somewhere safe, half-finished, in a maze of directories that only Ethan could navigate. But I stayed quiet, because this, all of this, was exactly what Paul had asked for. "You wanted flexibility," I thought. "Now you've got it." The domino effect. By noon, it was chaos. Emails were flying, calls were being made, and every engineer who'd ever touched Ethan's project was being dragged into meeting after meeting. The project he'd left behind wasn't just important, it was the backbone of an entire system rollout worth millions. Without it, deadlines would crumble. Clients would start asking questions. And worst of all, it made Paul look incompetent. He tried to spin it, of course. Tried to say Ethan had miscommunicated his intentions. But everyone knew that was a lie. His exit had been too clean, too deliberate, too poetic, and the irony, the company couldn't even reprimand him. Because he wasn't an employee. He'd follow the same rules they used to exploit us. Paul's own words, "That's why we hire contractors, so we can cut them loose whenever we want," had become the rope tightening around his neck. The panic meetings. The following week was a blur of meetings. Project continuity, risk mitigation, contingency planning, the corporate way of saying, "We're panicking." Every room smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. Whiteboards filled with diagrams that made no sense, sticky notes piled on top of sticky notes, trying to untangle the web Ethan had built. At one point, Paul called an emergency session. His voice was higher than usual, rushed, like he was trying not to sound scared. "All right," he said, pacing in front of the whiteboard. "We're going to divide up Ethan's work. It's not rocket science, we can pick up where he left off." But the silence that followed told him everything he didn't want to hear. One of the junior engineers finally spoke up. With all due respect, Ethan didn't document any of his latest changes. And some of his scripts reference private branches that we can't access." Paul's face flushed. "Then find them. We've been trying," the engineer said. "It's complicated." Paul slammed the marker on the table so hard it snapped in two. The ink splattered across his notes like a bloodstain. The slow burn of karma. For the next month, I watched it all unravel. Every day, there was a new fire to put out. A corrupted file, a missing dependency, an unexplained data error. Every time, Paul would storm through the office, barking orders, pretending he was still in control. But the truth was plain to see. He was drowning. The man who thought he could replace anyone, anytime, had just discovered what happens when knowledge walks out the door. The irony was almost poetic. Ethan hadn't sabotaged anything. He hadn't deleted files or locked systems. He'd simply left, midstream, taking with him the context, the understanding, the intuition that no manual could replicate. It was the kind of revenge that didn't require cruelty, just perfect timing. A reminder that not everything of value can be owned. The Whisper Network. Around week 3, the whispers started. Contractors talk. Always have, always will. People from other departments were quietly asking, "Hey, what really happened in your team?" And when the story spread, the part about Ethan giving 10 seconds notice after that, "Cut them loose anytime," comment, it hit like wildfire. Suddenly, Paul wasn't a respected manager anymore. He was that guy, the one who got outsmarted by a contractor. You could see it in the way people started addressing him in meetings, less deference, more skepticism. Even upper management began CCing others on his emails, quietly sidestepping him in decisions. The empire of control he'd built, the authority he wore like armor, was cracking. The cost of disrespect. I'd like to say I felt bad for him. But I didn't, not really. Because every time I saw him struggle, I remembered those 3 people he'd fired at 4 p.m. with no warning. I remembered their empty desks. Their stunned faces. The way one of them had whispered, "What am I supposed to tell my kids?" Paul hadn't flinched then. He hadn't felt guilt or regret. Just convenience. Now he was learning what inconvenience really felt like. Internal monologue. The psychology of a small man. There's a certain type of person you meet in corporate life, the kind who mistakes control for respect. Paul was that person to his core. He wasn't driven by results or innovation. He was driven by fear. Fear of losing relevance, fear of being seen as unnecessary, fear of not being the boss. That's why he loved having contractors. We were expendable, temporary. It gave him the illusion of power. He could pull the plug whenever he wanted and feel like a king. But when Ethan walked out, he wasn't just losing a contractor, he was losing that illusion. And when that illusion cracks, people like Paul break with it. I could see it in the small things. The coffee stains on his shirt. The half-shaved chin some mornings. The way his confident stride had turned into a hurried shuffle. The man who once lectured us about efficiency was now the one missing deadlines. Karma didn't hit him with a crash. It came as a slow, grinding erosion of control. The moment I knew, one afternoon, Paul stopped by my desk. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "Hey," he said, trying for a smile. "You were close to Ethan, right?" I nodded slowly. He hesitated. Any idea where he might have kept his latest build notes? The desperation in his tone was almost painful. Like a man searching for a lost lifeline. I looked at him, and for a brief second, I considered helping. But then I remembered his words, the smug, careless tone. "That's why we hire contractors. So we can cut them loose at a moment's notice whenever we want." And the pity vanished. "I'm not sure," I said quietly. He kept most of that in his own workspace, I think. Paul nodded, defeated. "Right. Yeah, thanks anyway." He walked away slowly, shoulders slumped, head low. And I swear, in that moment, I saw him shrink. Not physically, but in essence. He wasn't the boss anymore. He was just another man in over his head. When management came calling, by week 4, corporate HQ had taken notice. A director, sleek suit, sharp smile, flew in for a review meeting. And let me tell you, Paul looked terrified. He tried to spin the situation as unfortunate timing and transition challenges, but the director wasn't buying it. Because when they pulled the logs, they saw the truth. Ethan had handed off nothing. The director leaned forward, voice calm but icy. "So, let me get this straight. This engineer was responsible for critical infrastructure, and you didn't have a knowledge transfer plan in place." Paul stammered. He was a contractor, sir. We didn't expect." The director cut him off. "Didn't expect a contractor to leave suddenly. Isn't that the point of hiring contractors?" The silence that followed was brutal. You could almost hear Paul's ego deflating. He tried to laugh it off, but the director wasn't smiling. He looked at the rest of us, the contractors, and said, "Noted. Let's make sure we're treating our people like professionals from now on." And just like that, the tone shifted. Paul had been publicly humbled by the very system he'd used to justify his arrogance. The slow collapse. The project missed its deadline. Then another. Then the client pulled funding until it could be stabilized. By the end of the quarter, the once bustling contractor pen was half empty. The company froze new hires, budgets tightened, and whispers of restructuring filled the air. And Paul, he was moved. Laterally, corporate speak for demoted without saying so. His office window was swapped for a cubicle in another wing. His name disappeared from a few internal memos. The man who once strutted through halls now kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. Sometimes I'd see him sitting alone at lunch, scrolling through his phone, pretending to be busy. The same man who used to preach about loyalty and productivity now looked utterly, painfully, replaceable. Just like the contractors he'd once dismissed. Ethan's legacy. Months later, I got a message from Ethan. A short one. "Hope you're doing well. Heard things got messy over there. Didn't mean for it to blow up that much. Just figured it was time to let the universe balance itself." I laughed when I read it. Because that's exactly what it was, balance. Not revenge out of spite. Revenge through reflection. He'd simply mirrored back the disrespect he'd been shown. And in doing so, he'd exposed an entire culture built on arrogance. Ambient. A low hum of computers, muffled conversations, the subdued rhythm of a tired office still licking its wounds. 3 months had passed since Ethan left, and the place still hadn't recovered. The system he built was mostly back online, thanks to weeks of sleepless nights and frantic patchwork from what remained of our team. But even now, bugs crept through like ghosts in the machine, small, persistent reminders that no one really replaced him. And Paul, well, Paul had turned into a shadow of himself. He didn't bark orders anymore. Didn't do his proud walkabouts or talk about scalability or efficiency. He just existed. Every time I saw him, I couldn't help but think about that afternoon, the way Ethan had walked out with nothing but a polite smile and the quiet satisfaction of justice done right. It wasn't loud, it wasn't vengeful, it was surgical, and that's when I realized something that changed everything. Ethan hadn't just quit, he'd planted a seed, the unspoken shift. When management fails publicly, the power balance in a workplace shifts, subtly but unmistakably. For years, the full-timers had been the untouchables. They had the job security, the benefits, the access to the good coffee machine. Contractors like us were the disposable extras, invisible until needed, gone without ceremony. But after Ethan's exit, something new crept into the air, a sense of quiet defiance. We all realized something profound. They needed us far more than they ever admitted. Without our work, their projects stalled. Their deadlines collapsed. Their entire sense of control unraveled. And once that realization hit, once we knew our worth, everything changed. The manager who lost control. Paul tried to recover, of course. Tried to rebuild his image. He started showing up earlier, pretending to collaborate with us. He even brought donuts one morning, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Fresh start, he said, setting the box down. New quarter, new goals. Let's turn this ship around. Nobody reached for a donut. We just nodded, polite but cold. Because once respect is lost, once you've seen the man behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. He noticed it too. The silence, the disengagement, the faint smiles that weren't quite friendly. He'd lost more than authority. He'd lost credibility. The contractor packed. One evening, as the office lights dimmed and most people had gone home, a few of us stayed back, the core contractors who'd survived the chaos. There was me, a systems engineer named Lena, a data analyst named Craig, and an automation specialist everyone called Doc, because he fixed things no one else could. We sat around the empty conference table, the faint blue glow of screens painting tired faces. Lena broke the silence first. You guys realize how fast they scrambled after Ethan left? Craig chuckled. Yeah, they treated him like a temp until he vanished, then acted like the company would implode without him. Doc leaned back, arms crossed. It did implode, just quietly. We all laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was realization. Then Lena leaned forward. What if we stopped acting like we're disposable? What if we stopped covering for them every time they screw up? That question hung in the air like electricity. For years, we'd been trained to say yes. To absorb last-minute requests, take blame when systems fail, pull miracles out of chaos, all for people who'd cut us loose without a second thought. But now we had leverage. We didn't need revenge with fire or fury. We had something better. Control through competence. And just like that, the Contractor Pact was born, unspoken, but powerful. From that day on, we stopped overextending. We stopped working unpaid overtime. We documented our way, in private, secure files. We shared everything with each other, and only each other. If management wanted something fixed, we did it, properly, slowly, by the book. No more saving them from their own chaos. We weren't being petty. We were being fair. They'd set the rules. We were just following them, this time, with precision. The anatomy of control. You learn a lot about people when they lose the illusion of power. Paul's temper started to crack again. He'd ask for updates and get timelines that didn't bend to his will. He'd hover over our shoulders, trying to intimidate, but now, instead of fear, he found calm indifference. He couldn't threaten us anymore. Not without risking another Ethan incident. Upper management had made that clear after the fallout. We were the last thing standing between them and another project collapse. And for the first time, we knew it. There was power in silence. Power in doing your job exactly as written. No more, no less. It drove Paul insane. The human side of revenge. Revenge doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes, it comes in the slow erosion of someone's certainty. Watching Paul unravel was like watching a man realize his kingdom had no subjects left. He started avoiding eye contact, stopped attending meetings unless required. His voice, once sharp and commanding, now sounded tentative, almost pleading. And yet, I couldn't hate him anymore. I pitied him, because I understood something he never did. Control isn't power, respect is. The thing he'd thrown away so carelessly, treating people like parts of a machine, was the very thing that could have saved him. Instead, he built his own isolation. The second catalyst. Then, one day, karma struck again, not through us, but through timing. Corporate announced another budget cut. Surprise, surprise, they wanted to reevaluate contract allocations. Paul's new manager, a no-nonsense woman named Diane, came down to assess resource performance. She didn't play games. She wasn't cruel, just brutally efficient. The kind of leader who could smell weakness. Her first question in our meeting was simple. Who's responsible for the system documentation? Paul cleared his throat. My team has been maintaining that. She raised an eyebrow. Which team? He hesitated. Well, the contractors primarily. Her eyes shifted to us. Is that accurate? I could feel the entire room waiting, Paul holding his breath. I smiled slightly. We've been documenting what we can, yes. But a lot of the older material was never transferred properly from management. Diane scribbled something in her notebook. Noted, she said flatly. And right there, with one word, she'd just nailed him to the wall. The quiet exposure. Over the next few weeks, Diane did her own investigation. She asked questions, reviewed code histories, dug through internal logs. It didn't take her long to see the truth, how much of the department's success rested entirely on the backs of its disposable workers. During a debrief, she said something I'll never forget. Funny how the people you treat as temporary tend to do the most permanent work. Her eyes flicked to Paul. He looked like he wanted to disappear. The reversal of power. By the end of that quarter, the changes came swift and clean. Paul was reassigned, officially this time. Different project scope, they said. We all knew it was a demotion. And Diane, she called a meeting with the remaining contractors. I've reviewed your performance, she said, scanning us one by one. Frankly, this place would have fallen apart without you. I can't promise permanent roles yet, but I can promise this. From now on, you get treated, and paid, like professionals. For the first time in a long time, I felt something unfamiliar in that office, validation. The look on Paul's face when he passed us in the hallway that day, it wasn't anger. It was recognition. The moment he finally understood what Ethan had tried to teach him. What Ethan started. After Paul's reassignment, things changed fast. Meetings were efficient, communication improved, documentation was prioritized, contractors were included in planning sessions. It was like someone had lifted a fog. And quietly, I realized something profound. Ethan's act of rebellion had done more than humble one man. It had rewired the system. His 10-second resignation had forced an entire organization to confront its hypocrisy, to see that loyalty isn't something you buy, it's something you earn. The very phrase Paul had once used, "That's why we hire contractors," now echoed through the halls as a warning, not a brag. No one said it out loud anymore. A personal reflection. Late one evening, long after everyone else had gone home, I walked past Ethan's old desk. It was still empty, still neat, but now, it felt different, like a monument to quiet defiance. I sat down, just for a moment, and opened my laptop. In one of the shared folders, I noticed a file I hadn't seen before, tucked away in a random subdirectory. It was labeled simply, Note. Curious, I opened it. Inside, just one sentence. If you ever feel powerless, remember, systems run on people, not the other way around. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. Simple, profound, true. Ethan hadn't just left behind chaos. He'd left behind a lesson. And whether Paul realized it or not, that lesson had become the foundation of a better team, one built on mutual respect instead of fear. Soft fade. The sound of quiet typing returns, slower, steadier. A sense of balance restored. End of part 3. The turning point and the quiet revolt. Would you like me to continue with part 4, the execution and fallout? That's the final act, where karma fully completes its arc. Paul faces poetic consequences beyond the company, the protagonist finds closure, and the story ends on a reflective, cinematic note about respect, power, and revenge. Soundscape. The hum of a late office evening. The faint click of keyboards. Then, silence. It's strange how a place can feel haunted, even when it's full of people. After Paul's reassignment, the department carried on, but you could still feel him, like a ghost in the system. His name was still on a few old process documents. His voice still echoed in the way people hesitated before giving bad news to management. His shadow lingered, not out of respect, but as a warning. And while the company had stabilized under Diane's leadership, the story of what happened, the Ethan incident, as some whispered, had taken on a life of its own. It spread, quietly, across teams, across departments. A parable, retold in break rooms and Slack channels. Don't mess with the people who actually build the system. The aftershock. Months passed. New projects began. The department, reborn under Diane's leadership, became something unrecognizable from the chaos it used to be. We had structure, respect, boundaries. Contractors were no longer the last-minute scapegoats, they were the foundation. And yet, there was something unfinished. Ethan's story felt open-ended. His name was never mentioned in meetings, but everyone knew. It was like the silence around him had become part of the culture itself. Then one day, out of nowhere, an email hit my inbox. Subject: long time no see. Sender: Ethan W. The message, it was short, just a few lines. Hey, heard things have changed since I left. Saw a few familiar names pop up in my LinkedIn feed. Looks like the place finally figured out what respect means. I'm doing well, consulting on my own now. Turns out freedom suits me better than titles. Hope you're doing alright, and if you ever need a reference, I owe you one. No bitterness, no bragging, just peace. I smiled reading it, not because I missed him, though I did, but because I realized he'd moved on. And not just from the job, from the idea of needing to fight for his worth. He'd already won Paul's reckoning. As for Paul, well, fate has a sense of humor. 6 months after his reassignment, the company announced another restructuring. Entire departments were merged, and some roles were phased out. Rumor had it, Paul didn't make the cut. I didn't hear it from management. I heard it from a recruiter who'd reached out to me on LinkedIn. Apparently, Paul had listed me as a team reference. Yeah, he listed me. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the old part, the part that still remembered his smirk when he'd said, "That's why we hire contractors," wanted to tell the recruiter everything. But I didn't. Instead, I sent a polite, professional reply. Paul managed several projects I was involved in. He was results-driven. Strong sense of urgency. Sometimes too strong. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't salvation, either. Just the truth. Measured, fair, and final. Because real revenge isn't about destruction. It's about balance. And balance, finally, had been restored. His circle closes. Life went on. New projects came. New faces arrived. Some of the old guard left for better jobs, myself included, eventually. But I never forgot that chapter. Every time I walked into a new client site, every time I saw a manager treating contractors like second-class citizens, I'd remember Ethan, standing in that conference room, looking Paul dead in the eye, and saying, 10 seconds notice, right? And I'd smile to myself. Because in 10 seconds, he'd done what most people only dream of doing. He'd taken back his dignity. Years later, 2 years after I left that company, I ran into Diane at a tech conference. She spotted me across the room, waved, and came over with that same confident stride she always had. "I was hoping I'd see you here," she said. "You know, your old team's kind of legendary now." I laughed. "Legendary? We were just trying to survive." She shook her head. "No, you guys changed how we manage contractors. Company-wide. After Paul's fiasco, HR rolled out new guidelines. Better contracts, more communication, clear protections. You didn't just survive, you started something." It hit me then. Ethan's revenge hadn't just punished arrogance. It had rewired an entire culture. He didn't just burn a bridge. He built a better one behind him. The final lesson. Later that night, after the conference, I sat in my hotel room and thought about all of it. The chaos, the humiliation, the quiet defiance, the slow justice. And I realized something Ethan had probably known all along. Revenge doesn't always mean making someone pay. Sometimes, it means making sure no one else ever has to. That's what made his act so powerful. He didn't scream. He didn't destroy. He simply walked away, with his integrity intact, and let the truth do the rest. Sound. A soft closing laptop click. Then, silence, followed by slow, calm music. Narrator tone slows, reflective. In the end, that's what real power looks like. Not control, not fear, but the quiet confidence to walk away knowing your worth. Because the people who build the systems, who make the gears turn and the lights stay on, they're the ones who really hold the power. And sometimes, all it takes is 10 seconds to remind the world of that truth.